All right, we are live.
We are live.
Welcome back, everyone. Uh, Definitely, I take responsibility for everything in the last week. I said the famous words, "What could possibly go wrong?" And well, yeah, something did go wrong.
Very wrong. Very wrong.
Very wrong. So, I will be saying penances for now until the rest of 2025, probably at this rate.
Famous last words, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Oh
so
gosh. For those that don't know me, I'm Josh, and I'm the partner here at NetForce.
I'm Al. I'm a security professional currently working at Metro One. And wow, we 2025 has we're what 2 weeks in officially as of today. And oh my God, we have had a crazy 2025, and we're only 2 weeks in. So
Yeah, and the
uh,
money already. Oh my gosh, the bills already. I can't believe how much we've already just the damages associated with everything that's gone in the last 2 weeks is just astronomically insane.
it's great. I mean, we've got let's just go over the count so far. So New Year's Day, um, two active shootings and a car ramming, right? Uh, which we thought what could go wrong, as you so eloquently stated last week, right? And literally as we're ending the podcast last week, we get notification that Southern California, Los Angeles area is on fire, which granted is not uncommon. When you live in Southern California, we're aware that this is an area prone to wildfires. But then by Wednesday, we're seeing massive damage. So as of today, January 14th, we have 24 dead confirmed from the fires. So 24, fatalities, close to, and these are just estimates, 150 billion with a B dollars in damage due to the fires. Now, context for everyone: 2024. I think the week before Christmas, the tabulations on natural disaster related bills was about 24 billion. Um,
We just blew it out of the water.
Second week of January 2025, we're at 150 billion, and that's the fire alone. We haven't even included the cost of the massive winter storm that happened over the weekend. So we have I guess I'll use a tech term. We have greatly exceeded expectations for natural disasters in 2025. Greatly, almost redefines. We've redefined the cost of a natural disaster here due to these fires. I mean, it's I'm still processing, the damage, the bills, the second, third, fourth order effects from this fire and the impact to not only Southern California, but fire safety, forestry management, emergency management, crisis action planning, which is likely all going to be impacted from this one event. I mean, this is unprecedented, and Josh and I were talking a little bit before the podcast about some of the factors here. Um, but I mean, it's almost incomprehensible what's happened in the last 7 days.
Yeah. So I mean, what we're looking at maybe at least quarter million people. Not, is it quarter million? Probably. It's like
Yeah,
150,000
close
homes,
to.
quarter million people probably displaced overnight
Yep.
with two major fires. And by the way, this is winter time, which is typically supposed to be rainy,
Yeah,
but
it's supposed
it's
to be the wet season in California. The whole 3 weeks of rain we get in Southern California.
yeah, and it hasn't rained I think since like last year February.
Right.
So we've been dry for 10 months.
We've
So
been
that is a lot of kindling right there.
and on top of that, we had last year we had more rain than normal, so we had excessive overgrowth as well. So that I think played a big factor in this fire as well. So for those of you who kind of don't know the ecosystem out here, um, typically Southern California, so San Diego on average 9 days of rain a year, of actual precipitation. So in 2024, I think we had 20 days of rain. So we almost 3x'd our rain totals for our yearly average. All right. So when we consider that, what are the impacts of that a year ago? Well, when you have excessive rain in rangeland and forest, you're going to get excessive growth as well. So if that isn't managed, i.e., you don't clear out the excessive growth, you don't do controlled burns, you don't, uh, um, you know, add fire breaks or do these things, you're going to have more fuel, right? So the trinity of fire is oxygen, heat, and fuel. You have to have these three things to keep a fire burning. So we've added excessive fuel, or I shouldn't say excessive, we've added more fuel to a potential fire. The second piece of that is the oxygen, right? Well, we had a weather event known as the Santa Ana winds, which this year, and we get these winds every year. It's not, it's a known weather event, but this year, um, the winds were gusting much higher rate than they normally do. Correct me if I'm wrong, Just I think on average between 30 and 50-mile-an-hour gusts, right? So the gusts are the blasts of air, right? So that's like the fastest you're going to get when it comes to the wind. We had 100-mile-an-hour gusts this year, so unprecedented amount of wind, adding oxygen to fuel these fires. So we had excessive growth and we had excessive oxygen, and with the lack of rain, we've got heat, right? And so we typically will have some cloud cover, but we didn't really see a lot of that this year either. So the ecosystem was warmer than it normally would be, if you average it all out. So the three pillars of a fire, we literally had increases in all three of those: oxygen, fuel, and heat. So I think because and again, I don't want to make this a political discussion because there's been a lot of that rhetoric in the media. I think we want to kind of focus on facts, right? So we have these three underlying fundamental factors that you have to have for a fire to exist, and all three of those are increased astronomically than what they normally are, right? So what does that lead to, right? Well, it leads to a fire event that quickly becomes uncontrollable, and spreads at a rate that we just have not seen. So, me and Josh were talking about, you consider burning embers, you know, flying at 100 miles an hour on a gust, slamming into a structure. It's easy to understand, I think, when we break it down like that, how so many neighborhoods can be impacted so quickly and how the fire can spread so quickly to a point where it's unmanageable, right? 100-mile gusts, burning embers, burning debris, flying at 100 miles an hour with a lot of oxygen fueling it. We're talking about fireballs flying into buildings. And I think there's a couple clips from the news of fire trucks driving down the highway on the PCH, and you just see the embers just blasting across the highway. Just flying. It almost looks like it looks like a flaming snow flurry. Yeah, I mean it's crazy to see some of the footage coming out of this. But I think
I was gonna say, I don't think people realize how bad the winds are. I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking, we're typically expecting 30, 40, 50 mile per hour winds. That's typically what we expect. I mean, that's what we call normal. This is anything but normal. Uh, you know, if people want a understanding of 100 mile per hour gusts, well, a category 2 hurricane is considered 100 mile per hour winds. Technically, 95 to I think 115 is the rate, but you're having 100 mile per hour winds, a category 2 force uh hurricane kind of winds blowing through Southern California. That's like, as I was talking to a friend the other day, I can't believe we can actually have 100 mile per hour winds. That's unheard of. Like, I've never heard of anything like that. I was like, yeah, it's possible, rare, but it's possible. Because both Al and I both have a passion for aviation. So, Al, you and I both know the ultimate source and truth for meteorological weather would be airports.
Yep.
They have some of the most accurate and most precision driven for tracking winds. So I just happened to look in the historical records the other week for the winds at Ontario Airport, a little bit more inland. You want to take a guess and gander how bad it was?
I'm going to say a solid 85 miles an hour.
So it was actually their winds coming from 0 to 0, winds 29 knots, gusts 50 knots.
Wow.
It was sustained 29 knot winds. So that's roughly about what, 30 miles per hour, roughly?
Yep. Yep.
Sustained 30 mile per hour winds. By the way, I mean, if you also want to, if for those of you who don't understand how bad it was bad enough to cause several flights to divert because it was exceeding their ability to land. That's how bad it was. I was watching the other night a plane. I think it was coming in from, I want to say it's Dallas or Dulles. I forgot which one, but they made 3 attempts to land. JR made 3 attempts to land in Ontario. Had to go around 3 times because the winds were just that bad. It was causing the plane to be unsteady. Diverted to LAX. Messed up the landing the first time. And I'm thinking, oh, geez, poor passengers. That's 4 go arounds in a single flight. And then they finally landed and stuck the landing on the 5th time. But that is just amazing. And if people don't understand, too, how bad it is when the winds are, just look at how LAX runs its airplanes. 95 to 90% of the time, LAX shoots planes from the east into the west. We call it normal operations, but when we have something called reverse operations, when planes are taking off into the east and landing from the west, that's pretty bad because that means the winds are significant enough where it's forcing the planes to go over neighborhoods and take off that way. And because of noise abatement issues and people complaining about planes flying over their heads, they always do their best to fly over the ocean where and if possible. Right. And it's only because they had to go over that way is when it happens. The bigger test too, by the way, is when you start going into nighttime, when there's also noise abatement, when people want to go to sleep. The fact that they're still taking off planes into the east over past midnight gives you an idea that it's a significant wind event that they have to actually fly over that way. Yep. Night, typically LX would fly fly in and land that way. So they're over the ocean. So this way it's minimizing noise, but no, it is significant winds. So people who are saying otherwise, oh, it was just a minor breeze. Yeah, I think you need to have a big wake up check on that one. It was pretty bad.
No, this was definitely a major wind event in the sense of even if there had been no fire, the winds alone had caused enough economic disruption and disruption to just normal daily operations of a business or just day-to-day life. The wind event alone would have been probably a national story of how crazy the winds had gotten. And there's lots of speculation as to why they were so bad this year versus previous years. I'm not I'm not well versed enough in meteorology to speak to that, but for whatever reason, it is like most security professionals. We can always go back to the root causes, but ultimately we still have to deal with the issue of present day, right? So the issue of present day was at the time high winds. Now there's reports and a lot of speculation that this was an arson, that this was intentionally set in the state forest. And we, again, speculation. There's people who've been detained in connection with that theory. Nothing confirmed yet from the authorities that it actually was in fact an arson. There's still an investigation, and there's still an active fire occurring. So there's multiple things going on here. So it's probably going to be a while before we get any type of conclusive answer as to if this was intentional, this was an accident, a mix of both, of a natural event, which then impacted something, which then turned it into a natural and man-made event. We don't know yet, but there's been a lot of, I guess, criticism of the local government's lack of preparedness, all these other things. Again, don't want to make this a political discussion, but I think there's some key points we can pull out from some of the criticism about, water tables, reservoirs, power abatement. The report is that and President Biden said this, that they have to drop the power. And dropping power is very normal during a fire, because we understand that, especially in areas with trees and where power transformers and distribution points are, in rangeland and forest land, if we keep those areas charged with electricity, there's a greater risk of spreading that fire. So it's not uncommon during a fire to kill the power, right?
It's also state law too, by the way. It's state law to cut power during high wind events. It's called a public safety power shutoff.
Right.
Or is it PSPS?
And the reason for that is the last thing you want is a power line to break and having charged electrical power lines flapping in the wind, hitting structures, hitting trees, causing sparks, and then adding a potential new area for the fire. So that decision itself is not it's not uncommon. So that didn't surprise me. I think where a lot of people were really concerned about was the fire hydrants had no water, and the reasoning that was presented, via the media. And again, we don't know if this is true or not. We haven't confirmed it. It's just the information that we got, and everyone got for that matter, was when they cut the power, the water pumps, which allow the fire hydrants to draw water, were also shut down. Right. Now, again, I don't know how true that is or how accurate that is. I can't argue it one way or the other. I can say this, that most critical infrastructure operates on backup power. So I'm kind of wondering, was there an issue with the backup power for the water pumps, or was the water department directed to shut down operations due to proximity to a fire? Or, did they have to abandon that facility because they were being overwhelmed by fire? These are all possibilities that we don't know. So we're unsure. We're unclear as to that specific aspect, but ultimately, the fire departments that were in the area did try to get water out of the fire hydrants, and for whatever reason that we're still not sure about, we haven't confirmed yet, they were unable to tap the water sources to continue fighting the fire. On top of that, we mentioned at the beginning, this fire had multiple factors which made this thing move very quickly, and become very hot, and had a lot of extra fuel. So the typical allocations for water and fire mitigation were depleted very quickly. probably more quickly than anyone had planned on. So the reservoirs were running dry, probably 24 hours into the firefighting efforts.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's also uphill too. So that means there has to be pumps and everything putting back water going uphill and everything.
right.
Yeah, water pressure. But to your point, those reservoirs, those water reserves they have, these are 1 million-gallon tanks. And I don't think people understood how bad the fire is. I think one fire marshal was using the metric of the fire was spreading not one, not two, but 5 football fields. About I think every 30 seconds to a minute was metric, basically. That's how fast it was growing. When it's moving that fast and that quickly, you're caught in basically a defensive position at that point. And it wouldn't surprise me, let's just for the sake of conversation, okay, and I'm going to classify this as a clear, I don't know if it's true. Their water pumps were impacted by electricity. I'm going to put that in the category of I don't know it's true. But from a classic, economics perspective, a classic supply and demand, if you have a fire moving that quickly, that means you're going to be throwing everything you got at where you can. So that means you will be pulling every fire engine, fire tender possible and trying to do everything you can to draw a line as fast as you can. And it would not surprise me, because of the nature of how that fire was spreading and burning, it had its own microclimate at that point.
Yep.
Hence why a firestorm, it has its own weather patterns at that point, and it feeds upon itself at that point. That it gains so much momentum that no matter what you do, you weren't able to make a dent into the fire. So the water, being used to douse in high weather event, it wouldn't even surprise me that it was just spraying and misting all over the place, because just how fast it was just all over the place. So, when I hear like, oh, we should have enough water and everything, I'm just thinking, and I'm trying to be an apologist or anything like that, but everything that I'm hearing and saying sounds like it's a perfect series of events that suggests that nothing reasonably short of a miracle or some technological innovation we would have been able to stop that fire, because the supply hitting, you're talking about all these engine tenders tapping into every available fire hydrant possible, trying to pull water concurrently at the same time on, I'm going to say probably 1940, 1950s. I'd have no proof of this, but I'm going to just say antiquated water infrastructure. You're basically bound to, at that point, exceed the limits or capabilities of those of the water infrastructure. So I don't see any reasonable way, based on all current information, that we could have done anything to mitigate or slow down the events that happened.
Yeah, I think those are all extremely valid points. It's working with a lot of fire departments in Southern California and in understanding. I'm not a fireman by any stretch of the imagination, but I've done a lot of work with fire services, and there comes a point where you can quickly respond, and you can stop something to a point, right? And then there comes a point when you have to start yielding land to the fire in order to protect other neighborhoods. So you have to make a tough call of, we're going to let one neighborhood burn because we understand that there's nothing we can do, like by actually trying to put out the fire in that one neighborhood. We're going to give more, we're going to seed other areas in opportunity, and the fire is going to come around us. It's going to cause more damage in the long run. So it's hard. It's a really tough call for a department to make, especially when you're looking at, hey, you have burning, like you have vehicles on fire, right? So there's different categories of fires, and as you start seeing other materials ignite, like when metal is igniting, you have to put that fire out a different way. You can't necessarily use water because water is not necessarily going to put burning metals out, right?
Yep.
You have, we consider what's in a neighborhood. You have vehicles, you have structures, you have different types of foundations. Um,
Asbestos.
in the homes in this area, I mean, this is a very affluent area. The homes in these areas are fairly big. Um, and like it becomes a cat and mouse game of we have to seed a block. We have to sacrifice these 10 homes in order to save the rest of the neighborhood. So we're going to let the fire burn itself out, get to the street, which a street is a man-made fire break. Essentially, you don't have any burnable material on the street, right? But and that's a 100% fair and valid way to fight a fire. I think the issue here, though, is when you couple the speed of this fire with the winds too, just blasting, burning embers over everything. The fire departments have to make that call, and we have to consider too the fire departments. They have to protect their firefighters as well. Life safety is always important. So when you see a fire moving that fast, that hot, and you see the hazards around you, bringing fire engines onto a street where there's burning vehicles, you have to protect the engine, because if you lose the engine, now you lose the ability to fight the fire in other places, right? So when we look at the risk profile and we just start adding up, like, okay, burning vehicles on the street, debris on the street, power lines coming down that we're not sure if they're charged or not charged. We when you look at the risk profile for those firefighters, to the vehicles, it's like, oh my god, we have to back out of this. We have to get back to a position where we can actually effectively fight the fire, preserve life, preserve our equipment. And I think when the entire mountain is on fire and it's racing at you at 100 miles an hour, 5 football fields a minute, you're giving up a lot of land, you're giving up a lot of ground to the fire just to protect life, just to make sure that your firefighters have a fighting chance, right?
And I think that's a good point here too, because it's 5 football fields, like
Right,
people
right,
NFL football fields, 5 NFL football fields a minute. So that's 5 SoFi stadiums
right.
area burning a minute and spreading.
And
So at that,
coming at you, and that doesn't even cover the smoke, right? Like the smoke is an obscurant. You can't see in that smoke, right?
and
So
and,
you've got
and at,
smoke
at that
coming.
pace also too, by the way, think about it. It's like an NFL team going from one end to the other 5 times in a minute. That's insane.
Right.
5 links in a minute. That's insane. And that kind of pace and velocity means you have no predictability about how the fire is going to move and behave and spread in that point. So like some of the areas in that area, if you pull up Google Maps and look at I'm going to say now ancient history, because some of these neighborhoods are burned to a crisp. There's one way in and one way out. So committing resources to go in could potentially mean they get surrounded by fire and then they get overwhelmed at that point and there's nothing they can do. So you're talking about, to your point, Al, loss of life and loss of equipment at that point. And I think there was some lessons learned at a couple major fire incidences that resulted in change of policy that force, they can't just commit resources like that arbitrarily. They have to make, good, smart decisions where to commit resources to prevent loss of life, like firefighters.
Right. I mean, and we have to respect that. I mean, I think we have to respect. I mean, you cannot grow a fire department overnight. It doesn't work. So we have to respect the fact that these fire chiefs and these fire captains and the firemen on the ground had to make really tough calls. And granted, they are putting their life in harm's way to protect the neighborhoods, and they have to make tough calls like that, especially in a situation like this. So, I mean, obviously, I've echoed this multiple times, but I'll say it again. I mean, those guys put in a tough situation, absolutely heroes, did the best they absolutely could, given the circumstances. So my hat's off to them. The other issue is, and this is also an issue in the Paradise fires a few years back is there was a lot of criticism about there weren't enough air assets to, drop water from the air. And that's typically what you'll do is you have your ground guys essentially create fire breaks on the ground, dig trenches to slow the movement of the fire, and then you'll have overhead fire assets drop water on the fire to cool it off and prevent potentially prevent it from continue spreading and burning. You just allow it to burn out by wetting the soil and cooling it off, right, and depriving it of some oxygen. So there was some criticism about the helicopters and aircraft not flying. I will say this, and I don't know. Again, I can't confirm this, but typically when Air Force One comes into an area, all air traffic is stopped for a certain amount of time. And President Biden was in the area during the time of the fire, so that could have been an issue. I don't know. I mean, I think
No, it wasn't an issue.
Yeah. So
it was more so the high winds were more so
correct.
impacting the ability to fly because you have to understand, and for you to understand, every aircraft has a flight profile. They have a certain tolerance in the ability to fly. If you exceed those tolerances, you're going to cause problems.
Especially helicopters. Helicopters are much more susceptible to wind patterns than fixed wing. And that was going to be my next point is that, there was criticism about that, but I think the bigger factor was the high winds and the smoke. I mean, if the thing is with aircraft is you to Josh's point, you can only operate these things in a certain operating environment, and there's tolerances, and once you exceed those tolerances, you can't fly the aircraft. I mean, it's not safe, and this is the reason you're putting a mechanical machine with flammable fuel up in the air in high winds. If it goes down, you're potentially causing another fire somewhere else, which you're literally you're not solving any problems at that point. You're actually creating more.
Further, don't forget, it's also nighttime too, so that means you can't run those as fast and as quickly as possible. There's a lot of coordination between everyone to making sure people don't smack into each other and cause a crash, basically. Like nighttime, it's way easier because you can look left, right, up, and down, and you can see everything with much more clarity. But when you're flying, and for those of you who don't understand, pilots have to go through special nighttime flight training. I think it's part 165. I forget what the rule is, but the rule is basically you have to get a certain number of hours before you're permitted to fly at night.
And then there's the aspect of crew rest as well, right? So, again, we can't manufacture a pilot overnight. It just doesn't work. So there's crew rest where, pilots and aircrew have to have a certain amount of rest in order to safely operate an aircraft. On top of that, to your point about it being night, there's a visual component here too. Like we're dropping massive amounts of fluid from the air onto the ground. The pilots have to know where the firemen on the ground are, because you drop that amount of water and you drop it in the wrong place and you flood, you drop it onto humans on the ground, you're going to cause you're going to cause a lot of problems. I mean, you're probably going to cause casualties, right? So there's a visual component here too, that the pilots have to be able to see where they're dropping these fire retardants and these fluids on the ground. On top of that, there's the smoke aspect, right? And the heat. So heat rises, right? So there's a lot of issues when you fly over heated areas. We use the term, maybe the thermals, right? You hit the thermal and you're going to climb up a little bit because the air is pushing you up. So there's that aspect as well here. So there's a lot of different aspects when it comes to the air component, which I think unfairly people were blaming, well, Air Force One is here, but I think there was, to your point, there's more to it than, a politician coming into the area during a fire. There's a lot more that goes into that. And we saw this at Paradise too. They couldn't fly the helicopters because the smoke was so bad that the pilots literally couldn't see the ground because the smoke cover was so bad. They could not get any visual cues as to where they were. They couldn't safely drop the fluid, so they actually grounded the aircraft for a certain amount of time until the smoke was able to clear up and they could actually see what was going on. So, part of this podcast is like rumor control and like
misinformation, dispelling misinformation.
Exactly, right. So, I think when we look at that criticism as why wasn't there more aircraft or why wasn't aircraft flying, the more likely reason is the environmental factors, the nighttime factors of this, and that's preventing aircraft from being able to be used the way we would traditionally see it, right?
And let's also I just want to point out something too. Okay, helicopters probably easy to stop and go in a sense. You can stall, kind of not stall, but slow it down to a point where it can hover at a certain point. It works. It's designed for that. But not everything is designed for that too. So, for example, the Super Scoopers, they're much better equipped to actually handling and flying at slower speeds. But people are saying, oh, we're seeing these modified MD-80s, Boeing, sorry, DC-10s, and Boeing. I think it was a Boeing 747, maybe, I don't know, but different fixed larger wing commercial aircraft that has been since converted in for firefighting. And people are going, oh yeah, why couldn't you just fly these? I mean, these things fly 600 miles per hour, they can do it. I think you have to also understand too is that when you're doing firefighting on those type of aircrafts, they're built for that speed. They're not built for slow speeds. When you fly at that speeds, you stall and then you crash. So you're talking about some very, very skilled aviators, which by the way are far and few, who fly at near stall speeds. And they are literally trained again and again and again, because their margin for error at that speed, and by the way, at that altitude, it's not 30,000 feet. You're talking maybe 1,000 feet or maybe sometimes less over these fires, and they're flying it so they can drop fire or fire retardant on there in a controlled manner. It's not like you drop it from 10,000 feet. No, it just disperses all over the place. By the way, which high winds would disperse water or fire retardant, which means you're just burning money and fuel for nothing. So it's not making even a scratch, let alone a dent into this. So you have to factor in all these issues, and concerns. It's like cost benefit. Am I going to be spending that? And you might think, oh yeah, it would help a little bit. You should have flown it anyway. That's the side of you that's saying that they should have tried, but I get it, and there's a part that said woulda, coulda, should have in there.
Well, I think
it's not good. It's not healthy.
There's a risk profile here too, though. Like, right, anytime we leverage a capability against the problem, there's a risk versus gain, and I think if you don't understand the terrain, I mean, it's the simple answer is, oh, we just needed more water, we needed more aircraft. That's, in my opinion, that's too simplistic, because we have to consider if we dump 10,000 gallons of fire retardant or water into a canyon area, well, that water's got to go somewhere. It's going to flow in and out, right? So if that water, when it eventually seeps into the ground, the excessive water is going to run off. It's going to come through the canyons and it's going to start blocking roadways now, right? Well, that doesn't help the ground crews who are trying to maneuver on the roadways and get on the hills and move things. And if we oversaturate the hillside, right? What's the other issue we have here in Southern California besides earthquakes and fires? We have mudslides, right? So there's a lot of risk in cost benefit analysis that we have to look at before we just throw an asset at a problem, right? And I think when you consider the mudslide factor, when you consider, to your point, the risk to the aviation, the asset itself and the pilots, and then you consider, like, wait a second, the winds are high, we have limited visibility, like, this is the cost benefit here doesn't make sense, because here's the thing, if you lose the aircraft, you lose the pilot, it's irreplaceable as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's not as simple, we'll just buy a new airplane and we'll just get a new pilot. It does not work that way. I mean, these are limited resources, these are limited capabilities. We have to be smart about how we use them. And if it's going to cause more issues than it's going to solve, then we got to be mindful of that. The other thing I don't think people realize is like, you know, aircraft require maintenance. Like you can't run aircraft 24/7. So you run like the very basic formula. One flight hour equals 3 hours of maintenance. And that can go left or right either way. However, you consider that 1 hour of a helicopter flying up there fighting the fire now requires 3 hours of maintenance. We have a limited ability to keep these things flying. Plus, we have to factor in crew rest. We have to factor in environmental factors. There's a fuel expense here as well. There's a fuel logistics supply piece of this as well. These things require a lot of fuel, special types of fuel. So it's not something that we can just, it's not a switch we can turn on and say, okay, yeah, let's get more helicopters out there and do this. Like it does not work that way.
Well, and not just that, don't forget, you just can't throw more fire resources because you still have to keep a minimum level of fire fighting capabilities from where you
Right.
procured it or pulled from. So that means, LA County can't send all the fire tenders into Pacific Palisades and that area because they still need to fight fires back where you live or wherever you live.
Right.
They still have to do coverage. So it's a strategic decision like, okay, how can we, move resources around while keeping a viable level of, firefighting capabilities in the areas where we're pulling it from. It's why you're seeing all the mutual aid coming from all across the country, if not, the globe.
Right. And that's also pretty common in these disaster situations, especially federal emergency. When the federal emergency is declared, you now have the ability to bring in other resources under the FEMA umbrella from other states to help fight the fire. So that's a pretty common thing to see as well, especially during hurricanes. If you're down south, you see that a lot during a hurricane. Mutual aid will come in from other states to help. So all that is common. I think like what we see here, there's a lot of criticism on the local governments, the state governments, the individual departments. Look, we should go back and see if there was some things missed. But I think overall, when we look at all the facts and we look at all the factors here, when it comes to environmental factors, when it comes to terrain, geography, when we look at the speed of this fire, I mean, even let's assume we had all the water in the world to fight this thing. Let's assume we had all the aircraft in the world to fight this thing. Let's assume that we had, 40,000 firefighters pre-positioned and staged to fight this thing. I still think this thing would have gotten out of hand because of the speed and because of, the wet season last year. I obviously I don't think it would have been as devastating as it ultimately ended up being, but I still think we would have, this would have been a challenging fire, even if you had all the resources to fight it pre-position and you knew it was coming. This was going to be a challenging fire to deal with. You
can pre-position all you want, but it's a game of it's like a game of roulette at that point. Are they in the right place or not? You don't know. It's hard to tell. You do your best to pre-position everything. You make statistical analysis and make an educated guess, but that's all you can do. It's a guess. That's all you're doing is just guessing.
And fires have a mind of their own. I mean, anyone who's put on the fire uniform understand that fires will. It's hard to predict where they're going to go and how they're going to move. I mean, you can try, but then add on top of the fact that you've got flying embers, 60 to 100 miles an hour flying all over the place.
And not just one ember, multiple embers, like 30, 40, 50. I have a friend, I'm gonna call him H for this podcast because I don't think I can use his name publicly. But we'll call him H. H lives in the Pasadena, right against the foothills. He has a bunch of cameras looking at his door, and I was looking at some of his Instagram stories that he posted. Even though it's black and white, but I can see these hot embers just like dancing, like right across the street. I'm like, holy moly, that is insane. Like, not just one, it's like a bunch of embers like blowing over and over and over and over again. It was like nothing short of a small miracle that nothing caught on fire in front of his house. I mean, literally nothing caught fire. I mean, that's nothing short of a small miracle.
And,
Uh,
and we've seen some images, which and people are mystified and they're confused because you see images of like um houses like blocks completely leveled, and in the middle of the block one house is standing, and it's like, why did that house not burn and all the other ones burn? And again, like fires have a life of their own. I mean, they will go to the fuel, and sometimes um a house is spared and we don't quite fully know why. There's the one little thing where the fire decided to move left instead of right, and that house was saved and the rest of the block was gone. Unfortunately, a buddy of mine lost his home in these fires, and it's wild. His entire house was burnt down, but his picket fence outside of his home was untouched.
Yeah, I think those in the Pacific Palisades. Same thing happened. The house and everything was burnt completely, but someone's classic car was completely untouched. It just action, but is completely untouched. I was like, something that happens like that, and it's not just LA, by the way. People want to go to Google, look at the fires in Maui, the Lahaina fire.
Yep.
There is this one house that is sitting in the middle. I think it was a red house or red roof house, I think, but everything around it is surrounded by devastation, but that house survived. Charred a little bit on, I think, one side, but for the most part, it's survived. Required some repairs. It's still perfectly habitable, minus I think it was missing electricity and water for like maybe a couple months, basically, but perfectly habitable. By the way, before we get, it just occurred to me. Speak about limited resources. Can we take a moment to shame the drone pilot who crashed his drone right into a super scooper tanker, and what kind of an imbecile idiot he is?
And I think this goes to the point of like, just some people just don't have any sense. I mean, but there's always someone willing to put themselves at risk to get that great shot, that great camera shot, GoPro footage. I don't know why. I mean, evacuation orders are in place for a reason, and I don't think people realize the intent of evacuation orders. There is the public safety aspect of it, right? We want to preserve life, but we also want you to get out of the way of the first responders so they can do their job. They need to be able to fight the fire. So what a drone pilot was doing out there trying to, I don't know if he was trying to get footage. I don't know, but bad judgment, really bad judgment, and now we have a capability that we can't, like it's in repair right now, right? I don't think it's fine yet. So now you've taken out that capability to help fight this fire and prevent more property damage and more life damage. And just really, really poor judgment.
Poor judgment is the least of the words. I if I ever run into this pilot, I would love to just shame him to death, mainly because of how selfish that person was.
100%.
Just to get your 5 or 30 seconds of fame on Instagram or YouTube or whatever platform you're trying to do. No, you may have, that 30-second fame may have been the difference of saving someone's home potentially, or several homes, or a neighborhood. That's just how incredibly selfish I think that person is.
Absolutely.
Like you grounded an aircraft indefinitely until they properly fix it to specification, get inspected, and have it, essentially restarted up. So I know that it was grounded all yesterday. It was supposed to take flight today, but that was 3 to 4 days of grounding. That's 3 to 4 days of in minimal lighting. Because we're getting back a minute a day of light post winter solstice, but that is still a good solid 5, 6, 7 hours of flight time that could be used to go draw a bigger line in the sand to prevent that fire from spreading, and it's stuck on the ground in a hangar waiting for a part to come from de Havilland to help fix and patch that wing, and then having to wait for probably FAA inspectors to come in because air flying is such a regulated industry. So they have to try to come back again and waiting for the inspectors to come in to inspect the plane and making sure it is. And then if the off chance they didn't do repair correctly, then they have to redo the repair to spec and then get it re-inspected.
Flight to make sure that the plane's operating properly before it can even get out back to
operational flight.
So it's I mean, just ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's time, by the way. And if people don't understand, time is not money. Time is time. You cannot buy more time with any form of money.
And then we talked about the crew arrest, right? Well, all that time is going against that crew arrest clock as well, right? So I mean, it's catastrophic when you consider it. I mean, of that and that plane came from Canada, right? So, there was a cost and expense to the taxpayers of Canada, to, in good faith, they brought that thing out here, to help fight the fire. Good on them. But now it's just sitting there. So now we've taken the capability out from fighting the fire here in Los Angeles. We've potentially degraded a capability for the people of Canada when that flight goes back, or when that aircraft goes back. So just absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. So pivoting now, so the fires have been burning for a week roughly, right? And there's several security kind of concerns that happen post event, right? That you and I were talking about. There's the obvious, the looting and the robbing, which we've had reports of, and LAPD is and various departments are out there trying to prevent that. And that's the obvious one. We unfortunately, we see this happening after disasters. But then I think there's the cyber piece of this too, is the online scamming, right? And then,
oh, don't get me started. Those guys are just. Why can't we have nice things? Really?
Yeah. Why can't we have nice things? So we have the online scamming, then we have the charity fraud, right? So these are all things you have to be conscious of. I think that anytime you have a disaster, it's an emotional event, right? I mean, people have lost their homes. You and I both know people who've been directly impacted by this. And it wears on your heart, right? It wears on your emotions. It's easy to get manipulated. It's easy to, everybody feels like a situation like this happens. Everybody feels like they want to do something. They want to help. They want to be helpful. And, a lot of these scammers will prey on your emotions. They'll take advantage of your good faith and you're wanting to support these people and in their time of need. So what do you think, man? Like what are some of the common schemes and frauds that you've seen on the cyber piece that you see happening here?
So I'm also really just worried about, what's happening now. Like, people setting up GoFundMe's, I run a Facebook group for audiovisual. God, the amount of people I just see, lifting pictures from like IMDb, other people's Facebook accounts, Instagram accounts, or anything else. It's just amazing because I'm just thinking like, these are the people that these people are, just trying to just do blatant identity theft. And there's just so many parts of me that just goes and wonders, how many of these GoFundMe accounts are actually really real? I'm not saying don't fund them. I mean, there's obviously going to be trustworthy ones, but there's so many of them. I just kind of pause and wonder, like, how many people are just taking advantage of, the opportunity just to collect a few dollars? It's really, 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 disconcerting. And I'm being the paranoid party type. I believe there's probably definitely legitimate ones there, but how many of them are also not legitimate too? That's the part of me that just wonders how many of them are just not real, and I have no way of verifying anything that any of it's true or not. I'm also kind of concerned too, not just that, but the there's also a small cyber piece too as well. I was making the joke last night on, and it was also partial serious too. but will businesses change their security practices for the various victims temporarily so they can get back into their accounts? I'm mindful that my parents are elderly. They have a wonderful and awesome, you know, password book, a
Right.
book with all their passwords and everything. And I like going, oh no, how many people actually pack their password books as part of their evacuation process? And I don't think many people do. People think about their passports, people think about their driver's license, birth certificates, important legal documents. But probably the one most important document that they needed to take was that password book, and they probably didn't take it. So, there's now that piece of that's running in my mind right now. Another part of that, question that's running in my head is, the postmortem too, as well. Insurance scams, people trying to, trying to buy your property pennies on a dollar, making promises, fake assessor claims, whatever. I like I think it was one of the DAs yesterday who was on the radio when I was driving, making the point to all these people who want to do ill will about stealing and raiding and looting. There's a special place in hell for you. I was just laughing at that, and then he made the point. And if I had anything to say about it too, and we catch you, there's also a special place in jail for you too. And so, this is kind of why I'm saying, like, why can't we have nice things? It's like, come on, guys. This is not just insult to injury. This is literally taking a Pacific Ocean's worth of salt and pouring it and then rubbing it into a wound and then taking more and then just, pushing it in and just keep rubbing it in, like, and it's scalding hot melted salt too as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think from like a big picture perspective, right? I think that this should be a wake up call, if it wasn't already, about what is your emergency operations plan in the event of emergency, both as an individual, as a family, right? And then also as a business. When the disaster happens, it happens quickly, and there's a lot of emotions, there's a lot of panic, but as security professionals, we have to be the calm of the storm. When the fire breaks out, we have to be the ones who are calm, cool, collected, keep people on track of, like, are we actually safeguarding what we need to safeguard? Are we actually doing what we need to do? We understand there's a fire coming. Okay, in case of a fire, what's our action plan? What are we doing? What are we, what are we doing? A buddy of mine, unfortunately, he was impacted by the Paradise Fire a few years back in Northern California, and I remember him telling me, and this is a guy, really good guy, military dude, very prepared. He's not somebody who isn't aware of dangers, and understands being prepared is essential, right? When the fire broke out and they were looking out of their backyard and realized we got to get out of here. I remember him. We had a conversation after the fact. He's like, I thought I was prepared, and I realized, unfortunately, I was not. I grabbed the dogs, I grabbed the wife, I grabbed the kid, and I had two go bags that I hadn't checked in a couple months. I put them in the back of the truck, and by the time we had loaded everything up and we left the garage, our backyard was on fire. By the time we got down the street, we saw the back of our house in flames, and we realized if we had waited, another 5 minutes or so, we would have been in the house while it was on fire, right? I mean, that's how fast that event happened. They went from, and thank God they were looking out of their backyard and realized the fire's coming and there's nothing they can do, and they need to get out. Because in the event that the fire alarms were going off in the house and the house was already on fire, it's no telling what would happen, right?
Yeah.
They lost the house burnt down to the ground. There was nothing left, just a foundational pad, right? So what they got out at that point was all they had. So very devastating fire, but to the point of, like, you can never be too prepared in these situations. You just don't know how fast the crisis can spring up on you.
Yeah. One thing I did, and this is what I learned, I used to go camping as a youth into the mountains a lot at this cool campsite called Malahai Pines. Sorry, free advertisement for you guys. Um, but one of the things I remember the camp staff, as you know, I was there camping as a minor, and then later, you know, as a counselor. Was one of the protocols and requirements was that when we were there, especially during the last like you know mid 2010s, was a huge drought period. One of the requirements was all vehicles were actually required to not park facing in, but you had to face out and towards the exit. It was an absolute requirement. And I know camp staff got on our cases several times if we did it. You know, it was okay like for 5 or 10 minutes, but if they got like 30 minutes, they came back and checked it was still there. They got on your case pretty quickly. But the whole reason why you do that is so that you're not playing car music with chairs, panicking, trying to reverse out and everything like that. You know, getting loaded in. It's none of that. It's a very simple case of just jump on the cars and then go. Like just go, 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 go. It was just there, and then you know there was a whole protocol you know built in place, and you know training, orientation, and all that stuff. Kind of like what's that act? Muster drills for you know for cruise ships. There was a whole process, and you know to this day it stuck with me the fact that you know in an emergency you can't be actually trying to figure out how to back your car out and try risk hitting somebody and then going out the door. So like you know if you look on my driveway right now, most of the vehicles are right now facing out ready to go. So it gives us maybe an extra, I figured you know gives me an extra minute to load my car because the trunk is in the back, so that way I'm loading stuff easily. And then once it's go, slam the door, just jump in the car, put it into drive, and then poof, hit the road, ready to go. So I mean, pro tip for anyone who's listening and wanting to know this: if you're you know in a high risk fire zone like I am, because I have a giant nature preserve in my backyard that has gone up in flames several times, you know. As simple as changing the orientation of your car could buy you an extra 2 or 3 minutes just to get yourself out the door if you're over prepared, or 2 or 3 extra minutes to actually get your extra stuff, and maybe a difference of just one piece of paper that you might need.
And I mean, and there's a lot of stuff out there, you know, in the life safety space, survival preparedness space. You know, a buddy of mine, Mike Glover, runs Fieldcraft Survival, and he's got a great vehicle kit. You know, visor mounted vehicle first aid kit. He's got a vehicle mounted survival kit. And I'm not saying that we all need, you know, I think you've got to assess your own individual level, and figure out what level of preparedness you need. I know when I lived in the Bay Area, like in San Francisco, my level of preparedness, you know, what I was going to be able to take out was going to be much different than now that I live, you know, in Southern California. And then when I'm in Texas quite a bit. What I'm going to take, what I have in my vehicle is going to be different in all three of those areas, just based on environment and based on accessibility and other things. Right. So, you have to, the point is you have to go through and really consider and go through the drill, like you mentioned. You know, what does a fire, what does an earthquake, what does a massive man-made or natural disaster, what does that look like? What, you know, I think there was a lot of people who were caught in this one, particularly like, we mentioned the speed of the fire. Well, people were actively trying to evacuate, and that on the PCH, and that fire just overtook Pacific Palisades so fast that they were abandoning their vehicles and running on foot. Right. So that goes to show, like, wait a second, like this, I may be very prepared in my vehicle. I may have all the things I need in my vehicle, but I may not be able to use my vehicle because the disaster's to a degree that I have to abandon my vehicle. So what am I going to do now? Right. You know, and I mean, God, it broke my heart. I mean, I've got elderly parents, right? So I was watching that one on the news, the elderly man that they were trying to evacuate from Pacific Palisades Boulevard, and he was just confused, and they didn't have the wheelchair, and they're literally having to carry him out because if they don't get him out of there, he's going to die of smoke inhalation, or he's, unfortunately going to burn to death. And it's like, you've got to consider all these factors of like, okay, a lot of us have children, right? So it's like, okay, well, how am I going to evacuate with children? What do they need? How am I going to effectively get them through this situation? So there's just a lot of preparedness that has to happen. And I don't ever think a lot of people, like I've talked to several of my neighbors and several people just about the fires and situations, and they've had questions about like, well, am I being too paranoid if I have my family do a fire drill, or am I being too paranoid if I have a prepper bag, or and I say no personally. I mean, I think you can never be too prepared is kind of the mantra that I go by is, it's not paranoid if everybody gets out and you have what you need, right? And when the disaster happens, you're no longer paranoid. You're the prepared one. You did the right thing. So I think people have to kind of we've got to kind of tamp down on that stigma of, well, you're being paranoid. You're thinking nothing's going to happen. It's like, well, nothing's going to happen until it happens, and all of a sudden, you're not the paranoid one anymore. You're the guy who was well prepared. So
Yeah,
um,
I just programmed in my household here an evacuation notice. So if in an emergency, I can just not shouting, I could just immediately just broadcast into my Alexas and just say, "Hey, broadcast a emergency evacuation." It's a pre-programmed message actually, so I don't have to keep repeating the message over and over and over again. It literally repeats the message: evacuate, evacuate, evacuate. Like I just took the time, and it says it's like, I think it goes on for like 5 minutes because I had to repeat over and over and over in Alexa. So this way I'm busy now, I'm not chasing finding people. I'm now focusing on packing up stuff and shutting things down and locking things down, and focusing on defensive countermeasures while I'm trying to get out the door myself.
and I'd always tell everyone too, like, I understand there's emotional attachments to items, right? I mean, we have family heirlooms, we have pictures. There's all these things that we have emotional attachments to. I can tell you that like it's tough to walk away from your home when the fire's coming, but the most important thing is being alive. And I mean, thankfully now, I mean, a lot of things are digitized. So if you lose pictures, you can likely recover them from a digital perspective. But I know I have like my parents' home. Like if it burned down, I mean, you probably have 2 or 3 generations of my family history up in smoke, right? Pictures of my great grandparents, my grandparents just gone, right? Which is irreplaceable, and it would hurt bad, but what's more important to me is my parents get out of the house and that they're here tomorrow. So it's a tough call, but you have to consider that as like you're not going to have a lot of time. You're going to have minimal time, and then when you consider if this had happened, say like 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday, right, and everybody's at work, you're not going to be able to get back home. Potentially, you're not going to be. You're going to have to evacuate from where you're at to go somewhere else. So you have to consider like, have you thought about if you have to evacuate from work and you're not able to get back home, how are you going to get where are you and your significant other or your children, where are you going to meet up at? Like, where have you thought about that? Like, do you have a place that you're going to go to, or are you going to be scrambling to get to the school with all the other parents who are scrambling to get to the school, rightfully so, to get their children? But then where are you going to go after that, right? Where are you going to head to LA? Do you have a place to stay? There's a lot of things that you have to consider about when it happens. When event happens when you're at home and the whole family's together, much easier, right? Just get everyone into the car, get what you need. Hopefully you've already prepared. You just grab your bag, throw them in the back, and head to where you're going to go next. But it gets very complicated. School year, kids in school. Maybe you have, like I've got friends who've got kids in elementary school, middle school, and high school, right? So now you're going to 3 different schools to try to recover your children. You don't have the opportunity to go back home, and then you still got to meet up with your significant other wherever they're at. Maybe they're at home, maybe they're at work. So there's a lot of coordination that you have to consider that has to happen when you're doing one of these evacuations. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and let's also factor in, like
H, who else was talking about, who lives in Pasadena. Great example. Went home Thursday, Friday, try to resume normal life. Sunday took their kids to their competitive sports events in San Bernardino. Came back, and their area where they live was upgraded back from evacuation warning to mandatory evacuation. So much that they had to walk back to their house, just grab what they could in their hands, and for like 5 minutes, and then they had to go find somewhere. Like literally, that was one of those situations or instances where things were in flux. It just went from, yes, I'm safe and go in and out, to, oh, now I can't get even access to my stuff. And by grace of God, that they were actually had a cop who just, okay, you're right there, fine, I can watch you go in, your car stays here, whatever, grab what you can, come back, you have X amount of minutes, 5 minutes to get what you need. And they took advantage of what they can do, because they were out at that point. I also want to think, and I don't know if anyone remembers, but at least as I was a student, I don't think anything has changed. In grade school, we had fire drills all the time. It happened all the time. Granted, we were always confused when the first one of the year, was it a fire drill or was it an earthquake drill?
Right.
We don't know. We argue about it for a couple of minutes, but we all knew it was some sort of drill. And then we knew at the back, and to evacuate, where to go and everything. It was just standard operating procedure for that. One of the Facebook groups that I'm on, with a lot of parents on there for my area, the parents are all freaking out about, like, do I have to worry about my kids? Like, what do you do up in the fire and everything? And all I can say is I don't know what the current fire protocols are, or what the policies and the procedures and the emergency management plan is, but I know is they will follow it. So, like in my time, the protocol was for a fire, we reported to the playgrounds. That was and there was designated zones. We're supposed to report to those areas, and that's where the teacher would meet us. And then the protocol thereafter and the briefing was, okay, we have a fire, you meet here, blah, blah, okay. And then whatever. The other major, protocol was earthquakes. When we did the earthquake drill, again, we go to our muster stations, we report to a certain area wherever we are, check in, and then they will assess the buildings to see if it's, viable to stay, or if it's, in danger because it's on fire. And then, based on that, they will make a decision, to whether to evacuate. And they said the designated evacuation secondary site was a high school that was maybe about a mile away in terms of walking. But, that was the designated point that was assigned. So we knew, automatically, where to go, where to do. And you're talking 6th grade, 5th grade, 4th grade, 3rd grade. And we knew this by heart by that time, to a point where it was less about knowing what the drill, knowing what to do, but rather debating what the drill is, because they don't announce it. And I think, in this case, something to be also thinking about too is, what do we do in these situations? How to respond, what's the protocol, what's the action? It's very easy to, especially in a stressful situation, if you're not, experienced like this, or you haven't dealt with enough incidents, to get easily overwhelmed. You think you're going to behave one way, and that's where the training comes into play. It's when you get overwhelmed, you fall back on your training.
Exactly.
And what you've done. So, to the, your neighbors who might be listening on this podcast, I would say, do the drills, because it's going to matter, because when all hell breaks loose, it's going to be the training that you're going to fall back to automatically. And that's what you're going to go back to. You just don't have time to think. Your body is flooded with adrenaline, stress hormone, cortisol, every type of hormone possible. And if you don't know how to regulate or, think about things, that's where the training comes into play.
And I'm a big proponent of community preparedness. I think that the more people that are engaged on solving the problem, especially within like communities, the more effective the response is, right? I mean, if you're all independently just trying to get out and evacuate, it's not conducive, right? I mean, I know, like, and I'm blessed. I live in a great neighborhood where all of us, all the neighbors, we talk to each other and we have good communication. I know that's not always the case in certain neighborhoods, very dense urban areas, you're not necessarily going to know who all your neighbors are, and you're not going to necessarily have those conversations. But we have a few elderly people in the neighborhood, and we have the conversations about, okay, if there's an issue, who's going to go check on this person and make sure they're okay and that they can get out, right? And so I think, even on the community level, having those discussions is important, right? Because you don't, as we saw with this fire, and as we've seen with a lot of other disasters, I mean, the first responders are overwhelmed a lot of the time. They are pulled in multiple different directions and they are spread thin. And their primary job is to solve the immediate problem, which is potentially, they've got to get the fire under control, right? So if you're 2 or 3 neighborhoods over there, you're unfortunately, you're just not the priority right now. They've got to get that fire under control. So if you have a community action plan, you're able to be more responsive. You're able to make calls and like get out of there effectively and safely, and make sure that one, primarily loss of life is limited, hopefully to zero, but then also property can be protected and mitigated, right? Well, man, we've talked for a bit here on this thing. We always sum it up with like our lessons learned, our top 3, man. I'll let you go first this time.
Oh, geez. I think the big lessons learned here, number one, is don't underestimate Mother Nature. I think Mother Nature has a way of hitting back in a way that we least expected. I think number 2, if it's not Mother Nature, number 2, it never hurts to be over prepared. I think it's important to be over prepared than under prepared. I mean, it's that's just my opinion. Third thing, I'm tied between this. I'm gonna put politics out of the situation, but I would say be cautious of in the day of over information or misinformation, and trying to, trying to discern answers or situations or answers from every little source, from every possible conspiracy possible. I would say be careful and cautious of that, because we have a tendency of over explaining things that we don't have answers to yet, because we just don't know all the facts. So we rather
tend to fill in the gaps with whatever. It's like a good horror movie or sci-fi thriller, right? I mean, the director doesn't show you everything, so you fill in your gap. Your brain fills in the gaps of the most terrifying thing you could possibly think of.
And, jumping to conclusions. It's just
right.
I think the other one too, and this is where I'm tied with number 3, it goes back to what we talked about, I think last week or the week before that, the need for redefining and setting a new bar for resilience. I think we need to redefine, in this case, a new definition of what civil engineering resilience might be, or, maybe, I'm not calling out by any means calling it out, but maybe rethinking firefighting approaches, maybe potentially. Like, good example, someone had a fire recently, so they set up a really cool ad hoc fire extinguishing apparatus. It was just a bunch of pipes, a simple pump, and it was pulling from pool water, but it was just the standard the sprinklers, the ones that jet and arc, right, that it was. And they set up 2 or 3 of them around their house and perimeter. But they were the frontline first initial defense when the fire came knocking on their door. Fire did not touch their house. And you look at what was scorched, it matches perfectly to the arc pattern of those sprinklers. And so you just kind of go, maybe, a centralized all-in-one approach in this day and age can't work. Maybe it has to be, to your point, a community action plan or a community level design where you would actually have to, spray arcs of water to create an initial boundary. And, for all it may not save your house, but it may buy you 5 minutes to, get someone out, in that area. So, that's what I'm thinking, resilience, dealing with disinformation, misinformation, trying to fill in gaps, having to be over prepared, and I forgot what the first one is, but
preparedness.
Yes, just being over prepared.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think I echo all those. I mean, preparedness probably number 1 for me is just, you have to be prepared. I mean, these things like a natural disaster is it's not a if. it's a win type situation, right? I mean, you're all of us at some point are probably going to be impacted by a natural disaster, and the level of impact, in my opinion, will really be determined by how prepared you are to deal with it, right? And that's not always the case, because I mean, obviously there's things that we can control with things that we can't control, but for the most part, my viewpoint is the more prepared you are for something, the least amount of impact it will cause you if you prepared adequately, right?
Right.
So I think the second point for me is I'll try not to make this a political point, but I might veer in that area a little bit. But I think that there's a certain level of complacency that I think every community has, just by virtue of our expectations as citizens in the United States and in our communities. We just expect, if we have a fire department, that the fire will get put out, right? That there's something there. There's an institution there that is equipped to stop whatever that bad thing is, right? Whether it's a fire, from having an emergency, like a health emergency, I have the EMS that's going to come. And then if there's crime, I have police that are going to come. I think what we've kind of seen over the last few years is, again, I don't want to make this a political thing, but I'll disclaimer, I might veer there a little bit, but we have seen that the first responder community has been eroded by various factors. We just don't have as many people coming in to be paramedics, police, fire that we used to, right? And so I think every community's got to take a hard look at, are we well equipped to deal with whatever emergency might befall our community? And if we're not, and if we can't, like, I get it. Like, I think 67% of fire departments nationally have some type of volunteer force because of funding issues. Let's be honest, like, funding a fire department is not a cheap endeavor, right? And I 100% acknowledge that not every community is going to have the funds available to adequately equip and have a fire department that could potentially stop the disasters in their community, right? Or police department, what have you. But I think the point is I think we have to go back and look and see, okay, what is a realistic response given a certain scenario in my community? And, as an individual, individual accountability of my home, my family, myself, I need to be able to close that gap, right? Whatever that gap is, I need to prepare myself to close that gap. So if I live in, we'll use Pacific Palisades. If I live along the PCH, which is a fairly restricted roadway, small, heart of traffic, I need to be prepared that it's going to take longer for first responders to get to my location, just due to geography and terrain, right? And I think all of us collectively need to kind of maybe go back to the drawing board and look at how our lifestyles are, where we live, how we live, what are the threats to us, both, man-made and natural. And we should, in my personal opinion, I think we should look and see, have we closed the gap enough to limit the impact, right? What's a realistic response time for my first responders who are brave individuals and doing their best to do their job. But like you mentioned, time, the tyranny of time and distance, there's nothing we can do about that, right? So we have to be able to close that gap. So I think the first piece is preparedness, but the other thing is closing that gap between what's a realistic response time, what's realistic service that I can expect from my community, and what I should be prepared to do on my own in the event of a disaster, right? And then taking a really hard look and being realistic, like, hey, can I realistically do what I think I need to do if something goes down? And if not, how do I mitigate that, right? And then I think my last point here is really kind of understanding, like to your point on the misinformation, is understanding what factors are going to impact me, and really taking a hard look and understanding, like, this could be a reality that I deal with. this could be something that realistically could impact me and my community. And I need to go back to point one and be prepared for this, and more likely than not, I might be dealing with this versus something else. Right. So, but overall, I think, I think we're going to learn a lot of lessons from this. To your point on revisiting firefighting techniques, I think, me and I had talked before the podcast about forestry management, right? I think there's going to be a big discussion on that: forestry management, rangelands management, water conservation, water preparedness. I think this is a larger discussion, a national level discussion on, resourcing in general of given what factors we're facing now environmentally, tie in, people have thoughts on climate change. I mean, I think the fact for me, it's like whatever it is, if it's man-made, if it's natural, I don't care. We have to deal with it. Right. Like the fact is, we can go at the math doesn't lie. Like things are getting warmer, right? Okay. Well, we need to mitigate. We need to account for that. Right. That's something that we have to account for, moving forward. And I think there needs to be a bigger discussion on, how do we effectively manage all of this, right? How do we ensure that we are prepared for the next disaster, on a state, local, national level, and how do we reduce the impact of these things? And what are the root causes of this, right? I think there's, as we go back and analyze this and look at all the data and everything, I mean, there'll be tons of information that comes out. I mean, I think we got to take an objective look, unbiased, unpolitical, not pointing fingers, but more so like this system failed, or this process we built in 1935 or 1940, 1950. We need to revamp it and refresh it. It's not going to work anymore for the realities that we have in 2025. Right.
And then also being willing to implement the recommendations too as well. Otherwise, we're just going to keep reliving this mistake. And the next time we facing another $150 billion bill, we kind of go, why?
Right. I mean, we're going to have to pay this. We're going to have to pay this out one way or the other. And that was not how I think any of us envisioned starting 2025. So,
quick question now before we go. Are we going to cross 1 trillion this year?
Well, we're 15% there, I think, right? So, I mean, I think it's very possible. I think it's very possible. I hope not. I hope not. Is all I can say. I hope that if this is the worst disaster we have this year, it'll be more than enough to cover the next 3 years, right? So,
can I say the famous words again?
You can. I don't even want to think about what potentially can happen next week, right? Or this week.
Well, we're supposed to have another windstorm tonight, so
yeah. Oh man.
Well, I'll say it. If something happens and we know those words are cursed, we'll never say it again on this podcast. What could possibly go wrong? All right. That's it for this week's episode of the podcast. I promise we'll go to cyber next week a little bit more, hopefully, unless something else happens, like, I don't know, a small nuke or an earthquake, the big one happening. So I'm Josh, and we'll see you next time on this podcast. Cheers, folks.
Sounds, guys.